We've all faced tough choices, right? But what happens when that choice doesn't just affect you, but an entire city or even a country? Well, that's the heart of public policy, and it forces us to ask some really, really big questions about what's right and what's fair. I mean, seriously, how do we do it? How do we balance what's good for the majority against the fundamental rights of an individual? This isn't just a thought experiment. It's what governments grapple with every single day. And for centuries, two major philosophical heavyweights have been battling it out for the answer. So let's meet our first contender. In this corner, we have the utilitarian. Think of this as the pragmatic, results-driven approach. It's all about the bottom line. The morality of any decision is basically found in its final outcome. The question is always, what will produce the absolute best result for the most people? So, at its core, utilitarianism is all about consequences. It doesn't really matter what your intentions were. What matters is what actually happened because of your actions. The mission, if you choose to accept it, is to maximize what they call utility, which is just a fancy word for overall happiness or well-being. You want to crank that happiness dial up for as many people as possible. This idea was perfectly summed up by the philosopher Jeremy Bentham. This single sentence really is the entire philosophy in a nutshell. It's a pretty powerful and, intuitive idea. Good policy is simply whatever creates the most good for the most people. So, if you're a policymaker thinking like a utilitarian, what do? Well, you break out the spreadsheet. You start weighing all the potential good things against all the potential bad things. You try to put a number on everything you can, and then you just pick the option that gives society the biggest net win. It's all about the math. Okay, but not everyone is convinced that the ends always justify the means. So now let's meet our second challenger, the deontologist. For this camp, some rules are sacred and should never, ever be broken, no matter what. Deontology is basically the polar opposite of utilitarianism. Here, the focus is entirely on the action itself. Morality isn't about outcomes. It's about doing your duty and following universal moral rules. So lying is wrong, period. Not because it might cause harm, but because the act of lying is, in and of itself, wrong. The big thinker here, Immanuel Kant, gave us this incredible idea. He said you must always treat people as an end, never just as a means to an end. What he meant is that every single person has dignity. You just can't use someone as a tool to get what you want, even if you think it's for the greater good. So for the deontologist, there's no spreadsheet. It's more like a moral checklist. Does this policy violate someone's fundamental rights? Does it uphold our moral duties? It's all about sticking to your principles, not trying to add up happiness points. All right, the stage is set. We've got our two contenders in the ring. On one side, the results-driven calculator. On the other, the principle-driven rule keeper. Let's see how they really stack up when they go head-to-head. And really, it all boils down to this one massive difference. Is an action good because of what it achieves, or is it good because of what it is? That is the fundamental conflict right there. And look, each one has some obvious strengths and weaknesses. Utilitarianism is super practical and focuses on making society better. But, and this is a big but, it can lead to what's called the tyranny of the majority, where it's okay to sacrifice a small group for the benefit of everyone else. On the other hand, deontology gives us clear moral rules and protects individuals, but it can be incredibly rigid. What if telling one small lie could prevent a massive disaster? A strict deontologist might say, nope, can't do it, lying is wrong. Okay, but this isn't just some dusty academic debate, right? These two ways of thinking are constantly clashing in the real world of policymaking. So let's look at a concrete example. Let's think about how a government might decide on something like strict environmental regulations, say new rules to slash industrial pollution. So the utilitarian pulls out that giant scale again. On one side, they pile up all the benefits: clean air, healthier people, a stable climate for our kids and grandkids, huge long-term wins. But on the other side, they have to weigh the immediate economic costs, maybe higher prices for goods or some jobs being lost in certain industries. The goal is to find that perfect balance that creates the most overall good for everyone, now and in the future. Now, the deontologist just shoves that scale aside. They're asking a totally different set of questions. They're asking, do we have a moral duty to protect the planet? Does allowing a company to pollute violate the fundamental right of every person to breathe clean air and live in a healthy environment? From this point of view, protecting the environment isn't just a good idea if the numbers work out, it's a moral obligation we have to uphold. So if both of these pure approaches seem to have some pretty serious flaws, what's the answer? Is there a way to bring them together?
Well, in the real world, policymakers hardly ever stick to just one. They're almost always trying to find some kind of middle ground. One famous attempt to build a bridge is something called rule utilitarianism. It's a really cool hybrid idea. It basically asks, okay, forget about calculating every single action. Instead, what are the rules that, if everybody followed them all the time, would create the greatest good for society? So you get the stability of rules, but with the ultimate goal of good outcomes.
And this actually gets us to how a lot of smart policy gets made. You can think of it as a two-step process. First, you use deontology to set the non-negotiables, the fundamental rights and duties that you just can't violate. Those are the guardrails. Then, within those ethical boundaries, you can use all the utilitarian tools like cost-benefit analysis to figure out the most effective path forward. So, in the end, governing is this constant, tricky dance between these two powerful ideas. It's part math, calculating the greatest good, and part morality, upholding unbreakable rules. There's no easy one-size-fits-all answer. And the question that leaves for all of us is, what do you think is the right blend to build a society that's not just prosperous, but also just?